Hi, I'm Azalea. Welcome to Azalea's Kitchen. Today I'm going to be showing how to make French meringues. All the details you see today for measurements both in grams and in cups, and lots of the details are on my website azaleaskitchen.net. So what is the difference between a French meringue, sometimes called a simple meringue or an ordinary meringue, and say Italian meringue or Swiss meringue? The difference between those and this meringue, the French meringue, is that there's no heat involved. So for a French meringue, you have caster sugar at room temperature and you have egg whites at room temperature, and there's no involvement of heat. Italian meringues have syrup into the egg whites, and Swiss meringues, you do it over heat, and on a double boiler. That's the difference. I'm just going to show you a couple of things that you see perhaps in recipes to add to meringues. And that is cream of tartar, or sometimes the recipe requests to use lemon juice or vinegar. Cream of tartar, lemon juice or vinegar, they all are doing the same thing in meringue. They're adding acidity, and what that does is by lowering the pH in the egg white, it strengthens the egg white. But I've never had to use that, so just in case you can't find it, or you can do it without quite easily if you follow the method I'm going to show you today. Now, the sugar can vary extensively for making French meringues, and I explain to you why you would want to use less sugar or more sugar, because they both have virtues and they both have problems with it. And if I explain that, first of all, eggs can be very different sizes, and you can have one where the egg white weighs, say, 31 grams. I've had that when I was testing eggs for this recipe. And this one, which was one of the largest egg whites, was weighing 46 grams. That's 15 grams in difference, which is quite a big difference when you're adding up, say, 10 egg whites and so on, which is why professionals weigh their egg whites, because it makes more sense that way. Now, for the home cook, it doesn't matter so much to weigh the egg whites. But if I explain to you that if you do weigh the egg whites, you'll never fail for the type of meringue you want to produce at the end of the recipe. The range of sugar can vary from equal amounts of egg white to sugar all the way up to twice as much sugar to egg whites. I use the middle. I use 1.5 times sugar to egg whites. So why would you want to use less sugar? Let's start with that one. Well, it produces a finer meringue, more delicate meringue, and when it's baked, it's lighter and melts and very crispy in the mouth. It's a beautiful meringue, and also much better for piping. So if I show you these, you can see how they've kept the definition of the nozzle of the piping bag. The meringue weeps. I made this about 4 hours ago and let it sit just to show you. It took about 2 hours and then it started to weep. So this is why often we add lots more sugar to the meringue. Like here, I made it exactly at the same time, and as you can see, there's no sign of weeping. So adding more sugar, twice as much sugar to the meringue, means that you get a stable meringue. And just to show you just how stable it is, I made this one yesterday, so it's 24 hours old, and it's still no sign of weeping. So why wouldn't we want to use the meringue that has lots of sugar added to it? It's stable, why not? You can, it's fine, and I've made some here to show that although it's good, it produces a thicker meringue, a harder meringue, and when you break it, the thickness of it doesn't have that gentle crunch that I describe with a fine meringue. What I have noticed with the meringue that has a lot of sugar, apart from the thickness, is it has a tendency to crack more than the finer meringue. And if I crack open and show you, it also has a difficulty in drying out properly. You end up with more stickiness in the middle. So I like to show you how to do my recipe, one that I learned over 20 years ago, and that was 1 egg white to 2 ounces of sugar. When you convert that into grams and you average out the egg white, it's about 1.5 times. So we have here 2 egg whites. And before we do anything else, I'm going to whisk the egg whites until the soft peak stage, and I'll show you what it looks like on a slow speed. So now it's at the soft peak stage, and this stage all that has happened is the proteins in the egg white, which are all scrunched up, all tangled up, have unravelled. That's what the whisking does, and as they unravel they join with other proteins, and in the middle they capsulate the little air bubbles that your whisking is producing. So you want to do it slowly during this stage, and that's because if you do it too fast you're not giving them time to untangle properly and connect with other proteins. So now I'm going to add the sugar, caster sugar. You can use granulated sugar, but I'll show you in a minute why it's a problem at times. Add caster sugar or superfine sugar, a bit at a time. So a small amount, and then whisk. And even now with a small amount of sugar you can see the change. There's a gloss and it starts to produce finer peaks. Now I'm going to add the sugar a small amount at a time. The first few times I'll keep on doing it on a slower speed, and then I'll speed up as more sugar has been added. So I'll just carry on now to the whole recipe. It's almost there, but I can still feel some sugar around the edges that hasn't dissolved yet, so I'm going to put everything back into the centre. So now we have meringue that's ready for use. You can either pipe it or spoon it onto baking paper, ready for baking. But before all that, I wanted to show you this meringue. Occasionally when you're separating the eggs, there is a little droplets of the egg yolk onto the egg white. And sometimes recipes say if that happens, it won't work, you have to throw it away. This afternoon I did it on purpose. I put little spots of egg yolk into the egg white and I produced a meringue. Not the best meringues, but a meringue, so have a look. The meringue lacks volume, and you can see that also lacks very good definition with the piping bag, but it's reasonable. So for home baking, it's absolutely fine. It's not the end of the world. So what I like to show you is what happens if you overbeat the meringue. It will still produce a meringue, not a great meringue in terms of volume or in terms of definition, with the nozzle from the piping bag. Have a look at these. These little meringues I made this afternoon, overbeating them more than I should, and you can see that they're fine, you know, they're absolutely fine, but the definition is gone and also the volume of what I was expecting is lower. So what if you use granulated sugar? It's not a problem. The problem is if the granulated sugar is not dissolved properly, it will leave a texture on the surface. If you pipe a little meringue underneath the paper will then stick to the tray and won't move around. Now they're ready for baking. Put them in a cool oven. I put mine at 100 degrees Celsius, and that's probably the lowest my oven will go. And what you're doing is drying them out. When you put them in the oven, don't open the door. Leave them there for an hour and a half before you even think about opening the door. Opening the door brings colder air in, and I've discovered over the years that it makes them crack even more. The meringues were baked last night for 2 hours. After that point, I opened the oven for a small amount and left it for another hour and then cooled it down completely before removing them from the oven. One of the things that I like to do with meringues is to dip them into some melted chocolate, half dip them, and then let them cool down and sandwich them with some cream in the middle. So to recap, you want to use the more sugared meringues, twice as much sugar, for desserts such as lemon meringue pie or baked Alaska because it doesn't have the weeping, and then the more delicate meringues with less sugar for things like this, where you're serving it as a dessert and topping it with some fruit, and here I have some raspberry sauce. All details are on azaliaskitchen.net. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.